Hi, and welcome to this episode of Collaborwocky. Join our vibrant community and watch our latest episodes at modusinstitute.com/Collaborwocky. In this episode, our hosts talk about structure and understanding in teamwork.
This Collaborwocky topic is structure is a precursor to understanding, is a precursor to structure, is a precursor to understanding, is a precursor to destruction, is a dot, 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 dot. So the loop that we have is that people will get together in teams and they will try to self-organize, and they will self-organize with no structure. So then they will go out and they will gather up a structure that maybe doesn't fit. And then they think that that is understanding because they understand the structure that's supposed to fit. And then what you end up with is a structure being a precursor to an understanding, neither of which fit what's actually going on or the work that actually needs to be done. And then you have groups that are already working, and then you come in, or we come in and we say, okay, let's figure out what your structure actually is. We'll go through a VSM exercise or something, and they will see the structure. They'll have all sorts of epiphanies. And then literally 15 minutes later, they'll be trying to force their new epiphanies back into their original misconceptions of what their structure is. It's one of the most dangerous things about adopting a format or a framework that doesn't actually fit your work. So,
but Jim,
that's my lead.
That structure was in a book by an expert. Come on, it must work in all cases, right?
Jim Benson said so,
and it was a certified expert.
People blame me for their crappy process because they said, no, we can only have to do, doing, and done in our Kanban. You said so. It's like, no, every page it said, don't do that.
Don't do that. Yeah. Don't follow, create. Yeah, I know.
It'd be like Jesus coming back and saying, no, really, I actually did say feed the poor. At least 1,000 times.
Yeah. I remember, this could be painful to even remember. I remember when I was first going out and teaching agile concepts. And this was fortunately the time where there was not many books. And people would say, but I just want to do it by the book. And I could say, there is no book. There is no book on this. You have to explore. It's experimentation. It's about understanding what works best for those doing the work. Unfortunately, now there's a lot of books that people can borrow from, a lot of structures. And there's some structures, I think, that have done more harm than good. I'll put it that way. So,
well, and there was, I remember this. So in the early days of Modus Cooperandi, when David Anderson and I were when David was still here, we ran a conference in Seattle, and this woman came to the conference, and she came up and she was talking to us about stuff. And then she turns to Dave and she said, and David said something, and she says, oh yeah, that's on page 341 of your Agile book. And Dave just stared at her for a couple of seconds, and I think he said, yes, it is. but she walked away, and he's like, I don't know what was on page 341 of my book. So there are people who literally do go through these books, memorize them, and make them into a canon rather than a book of techniques. Recipes seem to win over techniques. And I don't think I've ever successfully baked a dish from the recipe, but I've always used recipes as something to launch how I'm going to bake the dish.
Yeah, as a guide. Yeah. And it's not that structure's wrong, as long as you understand why the parts of it are there.
Mm-hmm. Well, as long as you actually understand it, I think initially you have to enter into it just saying what's actually happening and what actually needs to happen.
Yeah.
And then what is the structure that enables that need?
Mhm.
And there's a sunk cost fallacy of we've already started with Kanban, or we've already started with Scrum, or we've already started with DAT, or we've already started with blah, 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 blah. And so we don't want to stop doing the things that felt good about those things. And that's fine. Just be honest with yourself about which of those things that feel good are actually helping and which aren't. And then be able to have the guts or the body parts uh, to change, I guess, is the easy way to say it.
Yeah. Um,
Please.
well, actually, I had something for you because I think this relates to what we do sort of backstage in Modus Institute. We don't get hung up in sunk cost fallacy, but that also means our structure changes a lot. And I know Thishant and I, as we also kind of are helping maintain systems for Modus, that can get a little tricky. So I'm curious, Thishant, then the the loose structure compared to other places you've been where there's a lot
Yeah,
of
the rigid
structure. I'm
structure.
really
Yeah, I would like it
really
to be
curious.
less loose, by
Yeah,
the way.
yeah,
You know, like when you brought up this topic, you know, I'm very strongly ops oriented, so I have
yeah.
blinders onto a lot of other things. So apologies for that. And the first thing that jumped out to me was like, you know, the part of the reorg and the structure that's that I'm participating in. Not at Modus, but at one of the other organizations there. And going back to Mark's comment about a loose structure and the rigid structure from page 341 of said book by certified expert. And there, I mean, there's the value is really, I think it needs to be approached from the ground up. That is to know, that is to say, we need to understand what exactly we are doing, what the work is, what the value is, and the structure needs to be adapted to that. The problem is because, you know, again, I'm speaking from the organization I'm with, the sunk cost fallacy, the adopting of tools that force a certain path and a certain structure makes it difficult to reorient or realign as the work changes, which it will, especially since we learn new things as a team, as a group,
Mhm.
as you know, customers come and go, and that I don't know. Like you bring up a really good point, Mark. Like at what point are we? Should we be flexible about the structure we adopt? At what point should we be more rigid? At what point should we, you know, continue to stay the course or change? And so these are really these are deep questions, and I guess it becomes hard when you get to a certain level of members that participate in this. Um, so that's kind of what I wanted to share. I have more thoughts on this, but please, I'll open up the floor.
Well, it was interesting because and I appreciate what you said, Thishant, because as you were talking about your ops perspectives and the tooling, it just occurred to me how there can also be a conceptual sunk cost fallacy.
Hmm.
Because I'm thinking of small teams that I work with that were exploring other tools, but some leader would come in and say, "Oh, let's just use Jira. That'll solve all your problems."
Yeah.
It's like it may not for this particular team because they may not be a software team. They may not even be a technical team. But there's that conceptual, oh, I know I can do agile stuff with this tool. It's like, yeah, but and it just occurred to me there's a sunk cost fallacy for conceptualizing, how to get work done too. So that was interesting. Thank you for that.
All right. On the last 30 seconds. One of the things about this particular topic is that most people don't spend a lot of time thinking about process or structure. And so they build a lot of assumptions around what that process or structure is. Um, when people use tools like value stream mapping, it helps people actually see the structure. But then they tend to do that as an event and then they don't touch it ever again, which means that people come in and they go, oh, and then they leave and they go right back to their presuppositions and assumptions. So when anyone goes off and says, I'm going to go figure out what our structure is with my team, and then we are going to do something with that, you have to make sure that that work that you've done stays visible. So if you are co-located, it needs to stay up on the wall. And when you do stand-up meetings or huddles, you need to talk to it, speak to it. And if they're not, then you have to find a way to include that in your standard work, in your daily work. If you're a distributed team, use that Miro board all the time for other things and keep going back to that value stream and looking at it. That is not easy to do, but it is easy to fall out of alignment and have everybody become disgruntled. So you do have that trade-off that you can actively make.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Collaborwocky, where curiosity meets community. Remember, the journey doesn't end here. Whether you're sipping coffee, commuting, or even Gemba walking, lean into the agile rhythm of life, and may your personal Kanban boards be forever whip limited. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep those headphones snug. This is the Collaborwocky team signing off. Join us for the next episode on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or at modusinstitute.com/Collaborwocky.